Okay. Today I'm with Pastor Chris.
What are we going to talk about? We're not started yet.
Yeah, we started. Let's talk about you. Let's talk about your ministry. Yeah, I mean, your ministry. I mean, basically, how many couples have you had? I mean, what's the results? What's going on? What's the process? I think, a lot of people, when they think about counseling, we've had a lot of cases lately, and the guy doesn't want to go to counseling. I didn't want to go to counseling. Nobody wants to go to counseling because I actually heard this comment the other day. The guy tell the wife, well, let's just work on it now, And it's so funny because it's like, hold on, man, you've been married 6 years, and you're now confessing to your wife, I'll work on the marriage. So what does that mean? For the last 6 years, you've not worked on the marriage? Like, what have you been doing? You've been married, so what playbook have you been working from? Do you get that a lot? I mean, people worried about coming in because basically they're worried about you taking the side of the woman or side of the man, or, how have you come to create your process and what you do, and what are the results and what you do? And teach me.
So the way it works, or the way we work at it, is we have a designated ministry line, 229-375-3522. It's also on the website, myfathersbusinessministries.org. So someone would call into the ministry line, and Stacy handles all the scheduling. And so I don't know names or nothing until we walk into a session. And our sessions we usually see couples from 5 to 7 sessions for about an hour per session. And most people don't want to come in or say there's a whatever fear because they think they're going to have to air their laundry. And what kind of separates us from everyone else is we don't air laundry. We don't go backwards once they come in the door, and Stacy tells everyone that during scheduling, we're basically hitting Control, Alt, Delete and going forward. And so I teach for about 55 minutes straight each session. The last 10 minutes of the session, sometimes there's questions come up about that session on how we can use the mechanics to go forward. But when a couple gets into the he said, she said, or he did, she did, we just shut them down. That's not who we are. That's not how we operate. But Stacy's very upfront with everyone when they call in, as is David and Jane with Good Samaritan. That's been their not secret to success, but the pattern works, the methods works, the function works. And a lot of couples, when David and Jane were teaching us the material, I told David straight out, I was like, this will never work for us. I was like, people want to tell us everything. They want to, yeah. And David was like, trust me, people will appreciate it. And I was like, it's not going to work for us. It's just not how we're wired. Our very first couple, about halfway through the session, I stopped to look at the notes because I didn't have it in here yet, or here really. The man said, and he didn't even want to come. It was his wife that drug him, but he stopped me and said, I am so glad you're not asking us anything. And I was like, let me step out and call David real quick. But nearly every couple we see, and it's usually the man, is very appreciative at the end of the 4th or 5th or 6th or 7th session that we didn't draw any information out. The reason being, in a lot of cases, that information, they cannot handle that information back and forth. They can't dialogue with it without getting into a big explosion. And so by coming in to two people they don't know and putting it out, either me or Stacy one would have to validate and say, man, you're right, or woman, you're right. And in doing so, we would be saying by default, one is wrong or one is right. We don't pick sides. We just start in Genesis 1:1. We talk about the garden and what happened in the garden, and then the commission was for man to work and keep the garden prior to woman coming into the garden. And so we spend a lot of time with that. We spend a lot of time with Romans 12:2. Don't be conformed by the patterns of this world, but be transformed by renewing your mind. I spent many afternoon on Pastor Jimmy Smith's couch just on Romans 12:2, and just how we would get waist deep into a theological conversation, and he would just stop and say, how does Romans 12:2 relate to that? And a lot of times it didn't relate to the conversation. We'd have to go all the way back to the beginning and start another path. Because if you really take Romans 12:2 into account, everything is anew. everything is new. Well, nothing's new under the sun. Well, it's not, but we get away from the principles a lot of times. Got to go back to the principles of it, and they work if we will work them. And so we spend a lot of time with Habakkuk 2:2 and Proverbs 29:18. And that talks about vision and purpose and writing the vision and make it plain. Without vision, people perish. And so we encourage couples, even from session 1, to take a pencil, not a pen, but write a vision for the week and stick it on the refrigerator, or stick it on the bathroom counter or the bathroom mirror or the rearview mirror of the car, or text themselves the vision. This week we're going to do this. We're going to go to Publix together. We're going to go to Austin's Friday night. Whatever the case may be. Very attainable milestones. Start big. And a few weeks down the road, those little milestones will be bigger, and they'll be much more frequent. And the steps will be easier to walk because the milestones, instead of once a week now, are every day, and sometimes many times a day. You know, a milestone could be I'm going to text my wife 10 times throughout the day and tell her I love her. Or the milestone could be I'm going to bring my wife flowers once a week. All the stuff that we as men probably did to woo our wives in the beginning. And so we work on a lot of stuff like that we began with. All of us likely began with and maybe got away from, but it's not rocket science. It's all in the instruction guide. We just, life comes in, things get busy, things get hectic, and we get away from it. And it's easy to fall away from it. And I was thinking about this morning, so many of us will maybe eat healthy for maybe Monday through Friday and take the weekend off, or may go to the gym Monday through Friday, or maybe walk around the block at night, or maybe meditate for 30 minutes, or whatever it is. We spend all this time and we're intentional about all this stuff. We may take a multivitamin every day, or whatever the case may be. Special conditioner, I don't use a whole lot, but whatever the case may be. But then the question comes up, what have we done to help improve our marriage? And the answer is always the same, nothing. But we expect these miraculous results. The expectation's high, but the work into it it's never. And usually couples that we see, whether it be a month in, we just finished a couple 37 years in. 37 years. And when we left session 1, I was like, what do we have to offer them? And I go back to my notebook and we're like, we got Romans 12 too. And that's what it was, is and this couple was in a form of leadership, both of them in their church, and had been for double-digit years. But yet, the dialogue and conversation was zilch, and there was a lot of tension, and there was a lot of life circumstances. There was adult children, crazy work schedules, bills, retirement coming up, all this stuff, so many intersections. But the little things had been just pushed to the back burner. The date night. Let's just grill hamburgers Friday night and both sit out by the grill, The little things that they started out with a long time ago that are now. And it wasn't any new things to them, but in the same token, it was all new to them. And so a couple like that, we were actually able in some of the latter sessions to just draw out, how did y'all get started? 37 years ago, life was a lot different.
Right.
No cell phones, It wasn't let's go watch a movie Friday night. It was a picture show, and you drove in, Things were so much different. You couldn't order groceries and have them delivered. Things were so much different. So my ability to relate 37 years back is obsolete, but Romans 12:2 is as relevant as it was today as it was then.
Yeah. It's so funny because we work hard to get a raise or a promotion or something like that because we see the result of finances or increase or stuff like that, but we don't think about the marriage. It's almost like we get married and that was the goal, and now basically there's nothing more to achieve. There's nothing more to learn or grow or increase into. What was the process for you and your wife? Have you always been such a great husband, or where did you find yourself in this mix of marriage?
Heck no. I have all the T-shirts for how to screw things up. We had been married a couple of years, and we started hitting some bumps, and we had small children. We were in a house that we probably shouldn't have been in because of mortgage. Just a lot of stressors that I brought in to the marriage, and things just got worse and worse, and there was distance and just a lot. I had built a circle of friends that I really had no business being around, and you are, to a degree, you are who you hang around with, and that was all choice. And I mean, there was nothing, I would say, crazy, bizarre, but at the same time, it was stuff that was slowly destroying our marriage. Some single people that did single things, and there was nobody that cared about us or our marriage. When we would get invitations to do something, hey man, why don't you come fishing with us, or why don't you we're going to do a guys weekend or whatever. That was not conducive to a real healthy relationship with two small children at home, and things just got worse and worse, and just issues began to compound and more and more and more, and it was all out of bad choices I had made. And Stacy was doing the best she could with what she had, but it wasn't much. And we got to a point where I really knew things were bad, and I had a friend, she's still a friend now, she's a counselor and she's a Christian, so I assumed you put them together and it's a Christian counselor. But it wasn't Christian counsel. Now, she did the best she could with what she had, what she had been trained in, what she does as a vocational, as an occupation, and she's top of her game. She's great. But the top counsel that was given for that season of time really didn't help us. It wasn't even a light at the end of the tunnel. It was like kind of like a firefly in a tunnel, I think. But things just got worse, and then we were attending a small church, amazing pastor, preacher, and so I went and sat down with him, and I was like, "Hey, man, we're in the crapper. I don't know what else to do. Things are bad." And he was like, "Just get in the Word." And I was like where it says like births or deaths, or like
right.
Leviticus, or you don't eat catfish, or what does that mean?
Some more direction, please.
Yeah, Bible roulette. Flip it. Jesus wept. Oh my God!
That means I need to weep, and then my wife will love me.
Yeah. So, and I don't fault him for that at all. He did the best he could with what he had at the current time, with the cards I was putting on the table. He and I didn't have a relationship other than he was in a pulpit every Sunday and Wednesday. Did a phenomenal job speaking. He's a great speaker, great pastor, teacher. But he and I didn't have the relationship. And so I could have applied the principles that he used, which was get in the Word, and I could have applied the principles that the lady before had used, which was dig around the tree and see if you can find the root. But the relational tie there to either of those to actually figure out how that functioned to walk out wasn't there. I didn't know that at the time. I didn't know how to articulate that. Things just got worse. And so at the time, I had been fiddling with real estate a little bit, and a buddy of mine that we had went to high school together, we had done some transactions. I knew something was different about him. We partied in high school, and we weren't really in the same circle of friends, but our circles kind of overlapped a good bit, and so we knew each other decently, I guess you'd say. But we'd had some business transactions, and I knew something had changed, and I didn't know what. And so I called him one day, and I was like, "Man, I'm at the end of the rope, and I don't think there's a knot." And he said, "Come over to my house tomorrow." And so I went over to his house. I didn't know if he was like selling Amway or roading in fields. I didn't know what he was doing. I just knew that from outward appearances, things were different in his life. I could tell by his persona. I could tell by his mannerisms. I could tell by the way he treated people. And so I went to his house that day, and work boots. His work boots were on the floor, dirt under the fingernails. Gym bag in the corner. I mean, just for the most part, a man's man. Just like he did all the stuff I like to do. And he started asking me some questions, and that was either. And I don't know. I'm not a wordsmith. I don't know if that was the beginning of our end or the end of the beginning. But that day at his house, things changed huge for me. And I went home that day and stood in the kitchen, and I'll never forget. It was like yesterday, and I said, "We're done with everything." It's like we no longer have friends. we're starting brand new today. He had not taught me anything. He just asked me some questions that day. That was it. We didn't get into any scripture. He just asked me some questions.
And from those questions, you came home and told your wife,
we're done.
We're done. It's just you and me, nothing else.
And the kids. Right. And so, as in the beginning, he took time out every week. Some weeks every day we would meet, but generally once or twice a week, usually at his house. And he would come in on his lunch break. I'd be on my lunch break. We would meet for an hour, sometimes a little bit less, sometimes more. But I was kind of able to apply everything that the counselor and the preacher had said. I didn't have to get to the root. The root was just the devil, really. And getting in the Word was obviously the fix, but the way we got into the Word, there was some weeks we may cover a verse. Some weeks we wouldn't even cover the whole verse. Some weeks we would cover a word in a verse. Some weeks we'd cover a chapter. Some weeks we'd cover the entire book. We never had a set agenda. We didn't know. My expectation going in was I'm going to learn something. And I didn't know until much later that his expectation coming into it was I'm going to learn something. But it was all, and it wasn't until many years later that I met Pastor Jimmy, and everything Pastor Jimmy taught me went right back to that man's couch. It was in a different format because Pastor Jimmy's life really during that season was around Romans 12:2 and exposing your imagination and opening your imagination. God give us an imagination. And so, during a short period of years, 5 to 10 years, I really learned what a spiritual father was. And during that time, everything that the man would give me, I would take home and I would give to Stacy. And in the first few weeks, we realized, we went to another couple and said, look, we're making some significant changes around this house. If you want to be a part of our life, this is what it's going to take. And they were like, we're in. And so I would meet with my mentor, if you will. I'd share it with Stacy, then I'd go share it with this other man with the understanding he was going to go share it with his wife. And so we did that. And so this one man, even though he wasn't meeting with these other three people, he was meeting with these other three people. Because the same stuff he was feeding me, I was breaking bread with the others. And
because you were teaching, it was amplifying the things that you were learning.
At a rate beyond understanding. I learned more in about 10 months to a year of discipleship like that than I learned in 7 or 8 years of Bible school. The learning curve, there's no, it can't be measured. It's faster than can be measured because it's all fresh revelation. It's relevant at that time in that season, and it don't have to be put in a microwave to be warmed up, and it don't have to be put in the refrigerator to cool off. It's ready right then.
Well, and the thing I like about it is when you are teaching that you are also probably making experiences. And when you're making experiences about subjects, then it really hits home. And so then you're sharing those testimonies of those experiences with other people. So it was like, if we're fishing together and I'm using worms and you're using crickets and you're catching fish, you're like, hey, my experience is these crickets work. And then I'm sitting here saying, well, these worms aren't working, And so then I would switch to crickets, And I think that's the good thing about that. Being able to experience truths, teaching the experiences and that happen in a good way for you, your wife, to others, and then they experience those same things. I love testimonies when people say, I did what you said. I talked to my wife. I changed this about my business. And then what happens is like you said, they go and they teach others.
Yeah. When we meet with couples, I'm able to take all that relevant information from that season and use just like you're talking about. And when we meet with couples, we tell them where we messed up. I don't go in there and paint a grand picture. I just say that I missed it here. And I don't say, perhaps you've missed it here. I just say, I missed it here. Then I go on to the next principle, and I missed it here. And then, in the session, we're not asking people to go out and carve another face on Stone Mountain. We're asking them to take their wife to the Mexican restaurant and order queso and guacamole. Woo! You can't have either one. You can have both today. And it's those little milestones. And in the book of John 14, 15, 16, that neighborhood it talks about, it says the Holy Spirit will be the helper, the advocate, or the counselor, depending on your translation. In Ephesians 4, it talks about our roles, our leadership roles, are to equip the saints. And so I believe with all my being, if we do our job to equip, it's a biblical principle that the Holy Spirit's going to do His job to counsel. And I tell people in the beginning, one of the reasons we're not going to get into exchange of He's such a, is because it's the Holy Spirit's job to counsel. So you need to be having this exchange with Him. Now, I believe I can help you get to a intersection, if you will, to have that dialogue. And the prayer in the beginning might be, I don't know what to do, Lord, just help me. And that's perfect prayer. I mean, the best thing when you say is, I don't know what to do. Here I am. Use me. That's from,
Well, I had that experience because I knew I was not performing as a husband. I knew my relationship with my wife was not at peak level. And, I'd be driving on the road. I'd leave my wife. I'd go to work for weeks on end sometime, traveling around. And you get those times, and I remember something happened. And I felt like the Lord said, prefer her. And anytime I would think about her or the marriage, the one word we come back, one phrase, prefer her, prefer her, prefer her, prefer her. It never changed. Years. Even still this day, I haven't got a new word for my wife or my marriage or my relationship. It was that one thing that the Lord said to me, and it still stands true today. Prefer her.
That's good. Everything takes work. There's nothing, breathing even takes work. I mean, everything, and that was some of our first, that was our really first, work and keep the garden. And here we are all these years later, and our jobs are still the same. My garden looks different than Adam's does and from yours, but I have a garden. We all have gardens. And when we don't work and keep them or work and tend them, that's when the unprefer. I mean, that's...
Yeah, if you don't mow the yard 10 days, it's high. You don't mow for 20 days, it's even higher. It's going to be hard to go through it. So you might as well do it on a consistent basis where, you can maintain the garden. Last night I realized, it was 12:30 and we're going to bed and my wife is chatty. And I'm sitting there thinking, woman, don't you see the lights are off and we're in bed? And she's chatty and she's talking about a subject. And I just listen. I'm like, I understand it's not the greatest time, but for whatever reason, she wants to say it right now, And actually, she's usually in bed by 10 o'clock, So for her to continue this conversation with me well at 12:30, and it's a deep conversation. And it's not one that I'm having to, like she's asking me a bunch of deep questions. It's a deep question. It's a deep conversation in her heart that she's sharing with me. So I just need to be a good listener, And so I'm blinking, I'm yawning, I'm nodded, but I said, we are going to finish this conversation. I'm not going to close my eyes. I'm not going to say, hey, go to bed. Hey, let's talk about it later, because the moment was hot. The moment for her was right then. And so I kind of question, like, did she want to have this conversation a week before, a month before? Did she want to have it earlier that day? And she just never saw the right time. And so, she sees the entry to be able to share with me. I need to keep the entry open. I need to say, hey, and that's maintaining the relationship. The garden is when the time is hot, let it go, be there. It's hard sometimes. And we've tried to do it, schedule, okay, let's once a week or let's do this every day or, and sometimes it's hard, trying to meet those schedules and emotions and feelings. You came in today like, I'm not feeling it. But now, you sit down and bam, it happens, So just being available for that spouse, to be able to have their moment with you.
Yep. And they need to be heard, especially, like you're here most of the day, Liz is there. It's the same for us. Not most days, me and Stacy are together all the time. But we even teach marriage meetings, some of the latter sessions where it is just a designated time, and we talk about pillow talk time. What happened sounds like with you guys that come from Lawrence Neighbor. They threw the phrase out one time, pillow talk time, and say we use it. That is sometimes where couples, the house is quiet. Our pillow talk time rule is we don't talk about finances at pillow talk time, but that is kind of a built-in rule for us because we start talking about finances and we can't go to sleep.
Because of worry. You're adding worry.
And so, but anything else, we can pillow talk. We can talk pillow talk. Schedules, kids' schedules, meal schedules. And we don't have to put a sign up that says, okay, marriage meeting has started now. But we have kind of a different relationship where we're together nearly all the time with couples. But marriage meetings are important, especially younger generations that we see. If they're not working or gaming, they're with other couples. There's rarely, and it's just different. It's like that couple that had been married 37 years. When we got to the marriage meeting, they were like, we eat supper together every night. End of the story. I didn't even have to teach the session because I know what goes on because we do our best we can to eat supper as a family. I know what the conversations, the dialogue goes on. But younger generations, that's, they're on the couch, they're in the recliner, they're driving down the road. And
the thing for like us, my wife has a certain diet. I'm eating differently. The kids are all plain eaters. And, maybe one kid wants spaghetti, one kid wants pizza. It's almost like, man, we're stretched, for everybody eating at the same time. But the time that we do have dinner together, it really is amazing. I almost think we've forgot that amazingness of the community of family sitting around the table.
Yeah, we had a couple about a year ago, a young couple. He was maybe 19. She was like 18 for 10 minutes. I mean, they were young. I don't remember the age. They were very young, though. We would probably say too young to get married, but they were young. He had worked at one of the bigger box stores in town through his high school, had actually done very well, moved up the ladder, had a really good job. He had done very well for himself. And she was in school and working a job. They were high school sweethearts. They had it in their mind. They were getting married. And so who are we to say, no, you're not getting married? They come to us for premarital, and we were talking about schedules. We're at the marriage meeting part. And the word integrity come up, and as we were discussing marriage meeting and specifying some time each week to go over schedules, bills, milestones, date night, expectation stuff. And it was like he was with us 1 minute, and I glanced back, and he was like gone. I mean, he was sitting there, but like the lights were just. I was like, "Are you okay?" I mean, it was a definite shift, and he was like, "I was just trying to think of." I've never seen what you're talking about. And I was like, well, you're young, but I was like, well, what do you, let's just hit pause on this for a second. And this was one of the times where we tried to pull some information back and forth. And I said, you've never seen like a family dialogue or anything like that? And he's like, his mom had raised him. He had never met his dad. His mom had never remarried. So for his entire 19 years or whatever it was, no male influence in the house. His mom did a super great job with both roles, the best she could. He was very complimentary of his mom, very thankful, grateful, instilled work ethic into him. And so I went to the wife-to-be, and I was like, have you ever seen, and she immediately, without even thinking, said, my mom was married 3 different times to 3 different men while I was in high school. And she was like, so I have
she in
no
high school
clue.
for 20 years?
Yeah, no, she was like, I have no clue what you're talking about. And it was like, the Spirit just quickened me right then. It's just a different generation. And So we sat there for a few minutes and just, I usually stand. I sat down at the table and he said, when I was a child, I spent summers with my grandparents where my mom could work. And he said, my granddad worked all day. My grandma stayed at home. And he said, but at night, they had a TV in their kitchen, and we would watch Andy Griffin or Wheel of Fortune. And we wouldn't talk a lot, but we would laugh about what was on TV. And he's like, maybe that's the integrity that, and I was like, okay, there's your target. That's something he could relate to. Now, I don't think Andy Griffin comes on at 6 o'clock anymore unless you got like 500 channels. But it was something that he could say, I can shoot for this target. It was a Romans 12:2. I don't have to be conformed by what's happened to me. I can put something new in front of us. And their life was hectic with schedules and school. But just having something to shoot for, having some milestones. And while it was new, a new concept to them, it wasn't really new. He had seen it just in a different way. But it was something that they were excited about implementing. It sounds kind of corny, but it's just the younger generations. And it don't have to be a younger generation. Sometimes it's older ones as well.
That forgets. So, you started this process a couple years ago, and how many couples have you helped?
We started July 1st, 2017. Stacy's got the number. I know it's in excess of 225 couples total. We've seen somewhere around 75 this calendar year. We've not seen as many premarital this year as we did last year. And most of what we're seeing now, for some reason, last year the kind of general age was somewhere around our age group, 35 to 45 years old, been married 10, 15 years. This year we've seen, for whatever reason, kind of like extremes on both ends. It's been couples of 37 years. We've got some that's 30 years. We've got a couple now that's been married 27 years, or either the newlyweds, less than a year. We've not seen a lot in the middle this year for some reason. I don't know why. Nothing, as far as we know, has changed the way we've put ourselves out there. But, somewhere in excess of 225 couples.
And what's usually the results?
The results that we know of any, we ask everyone to phone back in if there's any changes or any follow-ups. We've had one couple call back in out of all the couples we've seen and said they got a divorce. That went through 5 sessions. And we had one couple that come one session, and they did divorce like the same week. They knew when they had already been to the attorney when they come in. There was a lot of outside circumstances to that situation. There was still hope for them, but to our knowledge, there's been 2 couples total that have divorced out of everyone we've seen, and only one of the 2 has been through all the sessions.
So basically, in those kind of terms, you're talking about less than 1%. Basically, there is saving grace for your marriage. There is a way to make a couple changes to change yourself and communicate better and make relation and basically make the time and effort to make a great marriage.
For sure. And not so much when we get the first session in it, but after the last session, and we'll usually ask questions at the end, but the hardest thing is making that first call. And coming in the first time, and then after that, they're like, oh, that didn't hurt as bad as I... Right. And we can use some of this. And so after the first session, the ball kind of starts rolling, but it takes work. It takes work for somebody to take off work, but it also takes work to get up and go to the gym at 5 a.m. It takes work everything takes work. And so if they're willing to work at it, it will work for them. But our priorities going to have to be changed around? Yeah, it takes work.
I think there's such a niche here because basically most parents aren't teaching marriage. most schools aren't teaching marriage. Most churches aren't even teaching marriage. I always thought if I was a pastor at a church, I would want to try to hit the aspect of every message from the point of view of how can this work for a businessman? How can this work for a married couple? How can this work for somebody raising kids? Because basically the application of whatever's being preached from the pulpit should hit all of these demographics every week. I think Valentine's Day, we end up having these marriage retreats, right? And you pay $1,000 and you go, to Amelia Island or somewhere, and, you have 2 days and 2 meetings and, but usually the attendance is very small who goes there. And usually the attendance of the people who go there are people with great marriages. You don't see them bickering and fighting in the hallway or, saying crazy stuff to each other. So it's almost like they're understanding of the tilling of the garden. You got to spend some money on the garden. You got to buy some new equipment. You got to have the time and the financial application to get the best results. And so those people are the ones who are always going to the meetings. And so that's why we've kind of created this podcast, is because we want people to be accessible to the information to help them, get them thinking, get them connecting, get them to where they're going to start applying the content to their own marriage so that they can get the results.
Yeah. Dr. Mark Rutland teaches, if you ever go through this leadership school, he teaches practical tools. And that's really what we put out there is practical tools. If you'll take these little tools and use them, big things will happen. But it's practical utilization of tools. And I was a staff pastor for years. We did teach marriage. We taught a lot about the what of marriage, what marriage is, what a biblical household is, what all this stuff is. But it wasn't until we come to this side of the fence that we realized the importance of the how-to. And so that is kind of a message different. We don't get into a lot of teaching on the what a marriage would even. We talk about the how-to, the practical tools. And
because I think every marriage should, by the couple, make the want or what it should look like.
Right.
The woman might work. The woman might not work. The woman might want to have kids. The woman might not want to have the kids. The man might want to do this. And so, I think sometimes when we give advice, it has this target of what it should look like, and that target is how we think our marriage should look like. Well, not everybody's marriage should look like my marriage. Not everybody should treat their kids the way that they. I like that God made us all have our own mind, our own will, our own emotions. And for me, that means that there's not one right marriage. And what tools do you use? You might use different tools than I use in my marriage. Yes, my marriage might have flaws in it, in different places. And that's for me and my wife to consider. Do we need to work on that flaw right now, or are we just so happy with what we have our successes in? I know for a lot, it's so weird to me that we kind of let this go where we're not trying to be more impactful into people's lives in marriage. We have a lot of young people in our lives that we counsel, and we're like, all right, well, what book did you read? Well, who are you listening to? Well, what are you, applying? And, we're learning about different behavior groups and stuff like that. And, we found that one couple, the man's behavior group through the 5 love languages, he wants words of affirmation. And so the woman's behavior group is she wants acts of service. And so she tells the guy, acts of service, hey, pick up after yourself. Hey, you're a slob. You need to do the dishes. You need to do the laundry. You need to help out, because she's acts of service. She's trying to implement to him, hey, do these acts of service for me. And he's words of affirmation. And so her words of, hey, help me, are not honoring.
Right.
You know, you're putting me down. You're not respectful. You're not. And so it's so funny because it's just two behavior groups, but they think it's problems with each other. And it's not. It's just that we haven't recognized the words that she's saying to him is her cry of love. Come love me. Come appreciate me. And when he says you're not honoring to me or you don't respect me, it's him saying, please say I'm doing a good job. I'm a good man. You know, and it's just interesting. A little tweak like that could revolutionize a marriage, you know.
For sure.
I was talking to another couple the other day, and they were saying, you know, one's watching porn and one's smoking EpiPens, or you know, and the guy goes,
"Can you smoke EpiPens?
Is it? Oh no, EpiPens for allergy. Yeah. Sorry, my bad.
Haven't heard that one before.
It's a new thing.
Wow.
Smoking.
That's why they're so expensive
now. But you know, vaping. The guy. So it was interesting, you know, and the guy's like. He says she gets mad at me for smoking the EpiPen. And he goes, but I'm understanding her watching porn. I know, you thought it was backwards, didn't you?
Oh, the EpiPen part again.
Oh, sorry. So she watched porn. He smokes the vape pen. And he's like, well, she does this, but she wants me to stop doing that. And I thought it was interesting. You know, it's so easy always to judge other people of what we want them to do, you know. But why don't we have the conversation about things? And my part with him is you know, when you guys communicate, I don't want you to watch porn, and she doesn't want you to smoke. Is it an argument? He says always. He says it's always an argument. And I said, what you need to do is lay your life down on the table. And she's on one side of the table, you're on the other side of the table, and your life is right here on the table. And I said, be vulnerable about your life. Be vulnerable about why do you smoke? You know, you're worried about money. You're worried about work. You're worried about situations. You know, do you think it's a health concern? Should you ask her to help research it? I said, put everything on the table. And I said, put yourself on the table. Don't put her on the table. You know, don't ask her to dissect, you know. And before you do all that, go into it and say, this is a conversation. I don't want to argue. This is not a fight. I'm not trying to say I'm right. I'm not trying to say you're wrong. I'm not trying to say anything. I just want to talk about the subject of me smoking. I want to share why, how I do want to stop. I don't want to stop. You put it all on there and have the conversation openly and honest. And I said the hardest part is going to be is you guys have elevated every conversation to an argument. So you're in the habit of elevating every conversation into the argument. So you have
that's normal.
Right. You know, so I was like, but the new normal needs to be every conversation remains a conversation. Every conversation is, I want to hear what you want to have. You know, for me, it was one of the hardest things being honest enough to say, I don't need to be right. Every conversation where I got to an elevated point of yelling was because I felt I was not getting across as being right.
You just got louder, didn't you?
So I'm like, well,
louder.
If I'm louder, it'll sound more right.
And you smoked your EpiPen.
I smoked my EpiPen.
So Joe Glenn he still says, I got it written in the front of my Bible. He says, if you have to prove that you're right, you're probably wrong. Bam.
Bam. You know, and that was the problem is I didn't understand my wife as to become one. I thought, I know more, I understand more, come here. Every time I demanded that I was right, I was only half right. And I didn't see that. You know, why do opposites attract? Because we need that other side of the element. Liz and I are doing podcasts because why? I think I have a great idea of what needs to happen, how things need to happen and all that. But she comes in, she brings the other side of the thoughts. She brings in the sensitivity of it. She thinks of the kids and the other aspects and stuff like that. I'm I'm doctrine, you know, I'm hard, I'm doctrine, I'm like this, and she's like the Holy Spirit. She's like, no, but what about the love of the hug, or you know? And
did she say red light?
She never says red light.
That's the joke that nobody else is going to get but me and you.
Well, it's not a joke because he says red light because I always say inappropriate things all the time. Liz just says that was inappropriate. She doesn't say red light. That's
their code.
Right. It's our code.
Oh, now everybody knows the code.
Everybody knows the code. Red light means Ben said too much. But my wife does not cover me with code. My wife is like, dude, that was inappropriate. You shouldn't have said that. But, you know, the fact of the matter is there's lots of things that we don't say that are always correct. But we need to start tabling conversations of, you know, subjects about ourselves, you know. And once my wife started realizing that I was willing for change, I was willing for her input, I was willing for, you know, new thoughts into the marriage and stuff like that. Right now we've got a son, puberty, baby. He's going through different thoughts in his head, which means that us as parents have to go through different thoughts in our heads. You know, how are we going to treat this? What are we going to look like? You know, and so then we have to make the conversation. You know, we've had conversations like, all right, what are you going to say if you find him doing this? What are you going to say if you find him doing that? Like, we know things that he's going to get into. So we're trying to have the conversations before they come up.
I thought I was going to say red light there.
Right. That was one of the times I caught the thought. I mean, I was literally, I was like, okay, Ricky, bleep. But
yeah, so you said something with that couple I thought about, and some of the sessions 2 and 3, forgiveness and repentance and the difference and the similarities, but we get into giving. I'm talking about giving needs. So at that couple you're describing, it's almost like I'm going to give to get. But really, a biblical principle is give to give. And it says the Lord delights in a generous giver, or He loves a generous giver. So we've got to get in that mindset like you're talking about. It's just give to give, not give to expect or give to get as culture dictates. But it's give just to give. You open the door, somebody walks in, great. But a lot of us open the door, they walk in, nobody says thank you, and you're like, oh, you could have said thank you, you know. Walk back in, you know, but it's a different intentional mindset.
Well, even if we don't state it right away, like, oh, I stop working past 5 o'clock for you. Now you should have the house done when I get home at 5 o'clock. Like, you know, it's look what I gave up. Now what are you giving up? Or I stopped doing this. What are you going to stop doing? Or how are you going to react? Or, you know, now you have to give me a good response because I did something good. And it's a strange process that I think it almost from the standpoint of competition. I was frustrated with myself because I felt like I was in competition with my wife.
Cut. So in conclusion.
Long cut there.
So in conclusion. The challenge, do a date night, go on date night, do something, get out of the house, get out of your norm, set some goals. Don't come in at 5 and say it's okay to come in at 5 and say we're hitting a date at 7, but it's even better if Wednesday you say Friday night at 7, be ready, because then it builds anticipation. And so give to give, don't give to get. Thought for the day. If you have to prove you're going to be wrong, if you have to prove you're right, you're probably wrong. If somebody rubs you the wrong way, turn around.
Somebody rubs the right way, say thank you.
There you go.
Until next time.
No church.